Hey there, it's Carolyn with another Kira Studios video to help you practice how to draw from imagination in a more successful way. Last week we talked about center lines, cross contours, and plane changes. If you didn't catch the video, I highly recommend you catch it before you watch this one. Now, anytime you want to draw something that is egg-like or tube-like in nature, like arms or legs, you really need to understand how cylinders behave in perspective. Now, don't get scared. Just because I said perspective, it doesn't mean this is going to be a uber technical lesson. I will break it down really simply and show you an exercise that will help you improve your skills on how to make things look three-dimensional. So just in case you've forgotten a cylinder, this is a cylinder. It can be really long, it can be really short, but the main thing is it has a rounded top. And you know, the tricky thing is the rounded top doesn't always look round, right? Sometimes we see it more like this, and it looks like really flat and shallow. So I will help you understand how you need to draw your ellipses in your imaginative drawings to make them feel three-dimensional and successful. So let's dive in.
The exercise that's perfect for practicing cylinders and ellipses is to take a tree or a portion of a tree. In my case, I took a piece of a branch, and to try and draw it as three-dimensionally as possible by using only contours and cross contours. By doing this, it will force you to rely only on lines instead of shading to create that 3D illusion. To get started, you need a beautiful lay-in of your shapes. If you need help with how to get better shapes, be sure to watch the Better Proportions videos. Once you have your flat shapes, you need to become analytical. So let's do this together. We begin by becoming aware of our eye level. So close one eye and pretend like you have a laser beam shooting out of the open one. Where on the wall would be your laser beam dot? And then how far below that imaginary laser beam is your cylinder or your tree that you're drawing, your tree branch. Beginning with the eye level is the crucial first step when you're drawing a tree branch or a trunk that is upright, as in it's not leaning forward or backward. Once you have the eye level, you must look for your central axis. It's an imaginary rod that drives straight through the center of any shape you're drawing. You have to start here. Then you need to look at the opening of that circular and end point and starting point. Now, the closer that circular beginning is to your eye level, the flatter it is. And the lower it goes below your eye level, the more it starts to open up and we start to see its rounded nature. Let's look at the elements of this rounded opening. When we see it straight on, it's called a circle. When we see it in perspective, it's called an ellipse. An ellipse has two players, a major axis and a minor axis. The major axis is the longer distance, the minor axis is the shorter distance. The major axis cuts the ellipse in half horizontally, the minor axis vertically. Because the major and the minor axis intersect each other halfway through, it's important that when you draw your ellipse that it's symmetrical, that the left side is equal to the right and the front is equal to the back. So earlier you saw me actually measuring those distances with my pencil. Now also, super important to understand that your minor axis, that vertical short portion, is part of the central axis, that thing that we began with earlier in the drawing. Really important to remember that we will always begin with a central axis. Notice also how the major axis, the horizontal one, is perpendicular, meaning 90 degrees to the central axis. And once you've drawn your ellipse, we, for this exercise, are always interested in what's the edge closer to us, the one I just made red here. Once we're clear on that, we can translate in our drawing that this is the edge of the cylinder that's closest to us. So here again, I'm emphasizing the central axis is that rod that drives centrally through the form, and our minor axis is a portion of that. All right, you're still with me? So let's review. We, for this exercise, are interested in the edge of the cylinder that's closest to us. all of those edges I'm making red right now. The lower the edge of the cylinder is below our eye level, the more rounded, the deeper that opening is. The closer we get to the eye level, the more flat it looks. And the same is true as we go above eye level. If we're really close to our eye level, the ellipse is very narrow, and then it gets deeper as we go above our eye level. But now the edge of the ellipse that we're emphasizing is the one that's arcing up, kind of like an arch that you're standing underneath. Below your eye level, the curve that you're accentuating is the one that arcs down, like a bucket that you're looking down into, or a bowl that you're looking down into. Arc for above eye level, bowl for below eye level. Now let's apply this to our actual exercise. As you can see in the image, I snapped some little rubber bands around my tree branch, because if that theoretical stuff trips you up as much as it used to trip me up, we need to begin tangibly with things that we can actually observe. So those rubber bands already give me a good idea of, first of all, which edge I can see of the ellipse, and second of all, how much it might curve. Now, all that I said earlier when I was talking about the ellipses applies mainly for the core trunk of this drawing, because that's the upright one. But what about all those branches pointing toward or away from me? For that, I brought this little contraption along to help me figure out the orientation of my central axis and the widening of the ellipse. So see this little nail? That's my central axis. I'm figuring out what's the position of that. And then you can see the black edge and the red edge on the round opening. I will use those to help me guide how open to draw my ellipse. So I'm finding the position, and then I'm transferring it onto the drawing. And now I basically just copy that edge that I saw at the end of that little cylinder contraption. So whatever you have around the house that's cylindrical, that you can stick a nail through or a rod, use it as you are drawing this exercise. So here I go again. First, I begin with the angle of the axis, and then I decide how much is it pointing away or toward me. So angle first, then how much away or toward me. So let's find another one. That little one I just freehanded, had a good idea for how that's looking. But here, this one, again, I'm beginning with the direction of the central axis, and then I decide how much it's pointing at me. And in case you forgot, the more it points at me, the more circular the opening is. The more it is flush with my picture plane, the flatter it is. So here, this one is pretty flat, because it's almost flush with my picture plane. Don't worry if you don't know what a picture plane is, we'll get into that some other day. Again, the more it's pointing to you or away from you, the rounder it is. Just keep it as simple as that. Don't overcomplicate it. So anytime I'm trying to figure out a cross contour for a branch that's pointing at me or away from me, I begin with the central axis. I do that by closing one eye, using my pencil and aligning it with the direction of the branch, and transcribing that angle onto my page before I start doing any elliptical work. Now, if you wanted to take your drawing further and not just leave it geometric looking, you can keep working on this and use the same principles to add some details. What do I mean by that? I mean that when you do have details that are, for example, bark pieces that wrap around the trunk, you make sure that those edges of the top of the bark wraps in an elliptical manner that reinforces the cross contours that you've been thinking about. Or even these minor twigs, pay attention to how round they are as they grow out of the main trunk. There again, how round is their insertion point. The other details, they're extra. If you feel like you need them to make your drawing more interesting, to have more fun with it, by all means, put them in. But the main purpose of this exercise is to get you thinking about those cylinders with their ellipses. And if it helps you to stay with the exercise, then by all means put in those details, have fun with the contours, and you can erase out that underlying cross contour work if you would like. You only need to keep them in key places, like the beginnings and ends of the forms. Where do they come out of the trunk? Where do they end? And also where the form changes direction. So I hope this exercise shows you that learning about things in perspective doesn't have to be painful. It can be intuitive. You just need a few little devices that help you understand this. So keep practicing, and I'll see you next time for boxes. Take care.